In Raleigh, North Carolina, Michelle Young was found dead in her own bedroom. The investigation began, and from the outset, the police faced a nearly complete lack of evidence. However, the case quickly took a dramatic and unexpected turn. As a result, they uncovered shocking details that changed the course of the investigation and helped reveal the truth. Michelle Young was born on February 17, 1977, in the small town of Seville, New York. From a young age, she set ambitious goals for herself and worked tirelessly to achieve them. In school, she excelled, even serving as the captain of the cheerleading team. She also quickly identified her career path. Early on, Michelle was determined to become a tax attorney. To obtain the necessary education, she enrolled at NC State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and joined the local cheerleading team. But she later decided to leave the cheerleading squad to focus entirely on her studies. 4 years later, she graduated with a master's degree and almost immediately found a job at a local accounting firm. Despite being at the start of her career, Michelle's position offered a good salary right from the beginning. She rented an apartment in a nice residential area and spent most of her time developing her career. In February 2001, while celebrating her 24th birthday with friends, Michelle met a man named Jason, a few years older than her, and also a graduate of the same university. They quickly found common ground after getting to know each other and started dating. Jason worked as a sales representative for a large electrical tool company. He lived in another city, and when he met Michelle, he was on a business trip. After that encounter, he began visiting Raleigh more frequently, staying in touch by phone during other times. Eventually, he moved to Raleigh and, after a while, began living with Michelle. 2 years later, Michelle became pregnant. By August 2003, they decided to get married. On March 29th of the same year, their daughter Cassidy was born, and the family moved into a larger house in the suburbs. Around the same time, Michelle's sister Meredith moved to the city and frequently helped the family care for the child. 2 years later, Michelle became pregnant again. She and her husband decided to visit Jason's parents to share the good news. They lived in Brewalk, about 400 kilometers away from their home. Unfortunately, this trip brought no joy, but instead became a tragedy. On the day the couple was supposed to return to Raleigh, they were involved in a serious car accident that caused Michelle to miscarry. The family was deeply saddened, but just 2 months later, Michelle became pregnant again. Soon, they learned they were expecting a baby boy and eagerly awaited his arrival. On November 2, 2006, Jason had to go on a business trip to another city. As a sales representative, he frequently traveled across the country for business meetings and negotiations. This time, he went to Clintwood, a town about 490 kilometers from home. That day, Michelle invited her friend Sherry to visit. The two women talked for a long time that evening until late afternoon, when Sherry left. The next morning, Jason called his sister-in-law, Meredith, and said that before leaving, he had found a few designer handbags online at a great price and wanted to buy them as a gift for their upcoming third wedding anniversary. After leaving, he remembered that he had printed out some information about the bags and left them on the desk in his home office. Not wanting Michelle to see them and find out about the upcoming gift, he asked Meredith to go to their house and take them. Meredith agreed and arrived at around 1 p.m. At that time, she didn't have a key, and Michelle was supposed to be at work. However, Meredith knew that the garage door was broken and could easily be lifted by hand, so she entered the house that way. However, she immediately noticed something unusual. Despite thinking Michelle was at work, her sister's car was still parked in the garage. Meredith entered the house, and when she reached the kitchen, she saw Michelle's wallet lying on the floor. She called out for Michelle, but received no response. Instead, she heard the sound of their dog barking, which was strange because when Jason and Michelle left the house, they always left the dog in the backyard. As Meredith walked toward the stairs, she noticed a few drops of red liquid on the floor in the bedroom. Getting closer, she realized it was blood, and lying next to it was her sister, Michelle, motionless on the floor. Meredith rushed over, tried to turn Michelle over, but immediately realized that her body was cold. She immediately called 911. Meanwhile, their 2-year-old daughter Cassidy, who had been hiding under the bed next to her mother's body, crawled out and ran toward Meredith. Seeing her niece, Meredith called the police and took the child outside to wait for them. She checked on Cassidy and found no obvious injuries, but noticed that the room was covered in small bloodstains. She realized they were the child's footprints. Cassidy was immediately taken to a doctor for an examination. While the police began investigating the scene, They quickly noticed several strange things. The room had blood from a child, but Cassidy's feet were surprisingly clean. Moreover, there was no blood on her, and the footprints led only to the bathroom. During the investigation, the police learned additional details from Michelle's friend. Sherry said that the night before, they had both been trying to get Cassidy to sleep, and the child was wearing a diaper. But when Meredith arrived, Cassidy was no longer wearing a diaper. From this, investigators concluded that someone had cleaned the blood off the child and removed the diaper. The police found no signs of forced entry into the house. They discovered that Michelle's engagement ring was missing, but other valuable items, including cash, remained untouched. Discounting the possibility of a robbery, they found 2 small hairs that did not belong to Michelle on her body and near the victim, along with 4 DNA samples on the jewelry box that did not belong to Michelle or her husband. There were also several fingerprints in the house that did not belong to any family members. In the bedroom where the body was found, experts discovered 2 shoe prints in American sizes 10 and 12, with clear tread patterns that even allowed them to identify the shoe model. Additionally, the police noticed blood spatter on the closet door. However, the door was open, and the way the blood had splattered indicated the door should have been closed when the incident occurred. When they checked Jason's office computer, the police found interesting details in the web browsing history. Besides websites for the handbag store and directions to Clintwood, there were troubling search queries related to genetic anatomy, head trauma causing unconsciousness, and similar topics. Medical experts concluded that Michelle died from a heavy blow to the head. The attacker struck her more than 30 times, and when she died, she was 5 months pregnant, and the baby did not survive. The exact time of Michelle's death was unclear, but experts estimated the crime could have occurred around 5 to 6 a.m. The brutality of the crime suggested that the perpetrator may have known the victim and harbored deep resentment. As usual, the police first investigated Michelle's husband, Jason. They interviewed friends and family, gathering a lot of information. Their marriage had many issues, and Jason and Michelle often argued over family matters. When Michelle was pregnant, Jason was unhappy about it. He asked her to have an abortion, but she refused. After the car accident that caused Michelle's miscarriage when she became pregnant again, Jason was once again dissatisfied with the news. It seemed that the couple was headed for divorce in the near future. Meredith told the police that, given the obvious problems in their marriage, Jason's request to retrieve the information about the handbags seems strange, especially since more than 3 weeks had passed since their wedding anniversary. However, one clear fact contradicted the theory that Jason was involved. At the time of the crime, he was in a city 490 kilometers away. After Meredith discovered the body and reported it to the police, she also notified other family members. Michelle's mother called Jason's parents as she was on her way from Clintwood to visit them. Jason decided to stop by his parents' house before heading home, and when he arrived, they informed him of what had happened. Jason was shocked by the news and immediately returned to Raleigh with family members. On the way, a friend called Jason, saying the police were asking him many questions. Jason made a strange decision, saying he did not want to meet with the police directly and wanted to hire a lawyer. This not only increased the investigators' suspicions, but also opened up a new avenue of investigation. Sherry, who had visited Michelle the day before, revealed an interesting detail to the police. Michelle had told her that she had recently felt like someone was following her. That evening, Sherry herself felt like they were being watched through the window and even asked Michelle to go with her when leaving the house. The police tried to find evidence related to this feeling of being watched, but continued to investigate the possibility of Jason's involvement. On the afternoon of November 2nd, Jason drove away from home. With the 6-hour drive from the hotel to Clintwood, he decided to stop at a hotel halfway. Investigators requested surveillance video from the hotel and saw that Jason checked in at 10:54 p.m. 2 minutes later, he used his key card to enter the room and did not use the key again after that. The next morning, around 7:40 a.m., he called his mother from a cell tower near the town of Whitwell on his way from the hotel to Clintwood, where he had a business meeting at 10 a.m., but he was 30 minutes late. When Jason returned with his family, the police seized his white Ford. Forensic experts found no blood or evidence in the car. They also searched the hotel room he stayed in, but found nothing. Interestingly, in his car, they found a pair of size 12 shoes of the same brand, but the tread pattern was different from the footprints found at Michelle's house. By court order, the police took a DNA sample from Jason, but it did not match the 2 hairs found on the victim's body. His fingerprints were also taken, but since the house had many of his fingerprints, it was not very helpful. Experts determined that there was no blood on any of the fingerprints found. As a result, the police found no evidence linking Jason to the crime. He refused to explain himself to the police and hired a lawyer. Another detail indirectly proving his innocence was that when they searched Jason's car, they found a hotel receipt and a fresh newspaper. A Hampton employee said they had slipped them under his room door between 3 and 5 a.m., meaning he was definitely at the hotel that morning. However, the situation became more complicated. Only by assuming that Jason secretly left the hotel late at night, drove 270 kilometers home to commit the crime, cleaned the blood off his daughter, and then drove 270 kilometers back to the hotel without leaving any traces on his key card, could he have killed his wife? The police tried to verify if this was feasible. Through interviews with hotel staff, they uncovered an interesting clue. Early on the morning of November 3rd, an employee noticed that the emergency exit door was slightly ajar, propped open by a small red stone. This was unusual because the door is usually kept closed. From 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., he removed the stone and closed the door. Later, he checked the surveillance camera and found that one camera near the stairwell, close to the door, was not working. The cable had been cut. He reconnected the cable around 5:50 a.m., and the camera resumed functioning. From the footage, the police determined that the camera had been disabled at 11:19 p.m. Then something happened. Less than an hour after the camera was reconnected at 6:35 a.m., it suddenly pointed toward the ceiling. Since there is no automatic mechanism to change the camera's position, it could only have been manually turned to avoid recording the hallway. Hotel management confirmed that the camera had never been turned off before, and the only other time it pointed at the ceiling was a few years ago when a guest wanted to leave secretly. This was crucial evidence that made the police suspect that Jason might have left the hotel and driven home through this door. The hotel's emergency exit door could only be opened from the inside. Jason could have used this exit to leave without passing through the main entrance, where there were staff and other cameras. Investigators interviewed Michelle's neighbors about the night of the crime. Around 4 a.m., a woman delivering newspapers near Michelle's house saw a light-colored SUV, but she couldn't recall the make of the vehicle. Another neighbor, who finished her shift at 5:20 a.m., also saw a white SUV parked near Jason and Michelle's home. As she passed by, she saw a man sitting in the driver's seat, but she didn't recognize his face. More interestingly, there was a woman sitting in the passenger seat, seemingly trying to hide her face. A third witness, driving by the house at 6:15 a.m., also saw the white SUV parked there, but no one was inside. The police believed this vehicle belonged to Jason, but the fact that he was in the car with a woman surprised them. They tried to identify the woman, but were unsuccessful. During the investigation, the police discovered that Jason had been having an affair since college. The woman lived in Florida, and Jason often used business trips as an excuse to meet her. They also discovered that, just before Michelle was killed, the two had exchanged nearly 50 calls, but the content of the calls was unclear. Despite these details, the police still couldn't find evidence linking Jason to the crime. He refused to speak to the police without a lawyer, and even with a lawyer present, he remained silent. The investigators continued to actively probe, but the case dragged on for months. They were nearly certain that Jason was the culprit, but without concrete evidence, they didn't rush to arrest him. It wasn't until December 14th, 2009, 3 years later, that he was formally charged with murder. They realized that they could not find any new evidence, so they gathered all the existing documents to prosecute him. The trial began in June 2011, 2 years later. The prosecutor argued that Jason had planned to kill his wife to avoid losing his assets in a divorce. According to them, he chose that particular hotel so he could drive home, kill Michelle, and then return to the hotel. Jason's former girlfriends also testified. One woman said that Jason had proposed to her and given her an engagement ring, but after an argument, he snatched the ring off her finger. Since the killer had taken Michelle's engagement ring, these testimonies were crucial for the prosecution. Another woman, a friend of Michelle's, had been Jason's second mistress. She revealed that she had stayed at Jason's house while Michelle was away. She was married, but one night, Jason took her engagement ring from her and only returned it the next day, which she found odd. A college friend also testified that they had once dated, and a few days before the murder, Jason wrote her a letter that said, "I don't know when things got this way, but I know it will end with 2 broken hearts. I don't care because you deserve it, even if just for a moment. With Michelle being murdered just days after this letter, its content seemed highly suspicious. But the key witness was a woman working at the gas station between the hotel and Clintwood. She recalled that around 5:20 a.m., a man driving the white SUV stopped at the farthest gas pump. He wanted to fill up, but according to the law, payment must be made in advance or identification must be presented during nighttime hours. The driver walked in, yelled at the employee, threw $20 on the counter, filled up with $15 worth of gas, and left without taking the change. She was certain the man was Jason. This testimony changed the course of the case, as it indicated that Jason was traveling between the hotel and his home that morning, further fueling the suspicion that he was the perpetrator. Michelle's sister, Meredith, also testified. After the incident, Cassidy stayed with her father, but Michelle's relatives sought court permission to temporarily take the child. This process dragged on for several years, and just when the lawyer was about to succeed, Jason gave up his custody rights completely. In court, Jason spoke for the first time, presenting his version of events and denying that he killed his wife. He admitted that their marriage was troubled, but insisted they were going to divorce and that he had no motive to kill Michelle. His lawyer argued that there was no conclusive evidence to convict him, attempting to convince the jury that he couldn't have driven such a long distance in such a short amount of time and returned to the hotel early in the morning. They calculated the average fuel consumption of his car and compared it to the gas station data, arguing that he didn't have enough gas to make the trip, but they couldn't prove this. However, the jury couldn't reach a consensus, leading the judge to declare a mistrial and reschedule the trial for 1 year later. In the meantime, something important happened. Michelle's family, believing Jason killed her, filed a civil lawsuit against him. Unlike a criminal case, a civil lawsuit requires a lower standard of evidence and cannot result in a prison sentence. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge concluded that Jason was the one who killed Michelle and ordered him to pay $15 million in damages to her family. In the 2012 retrial, the prosecution was allowed to use the civil verdict to bolster their argument that Jason was guilty. Additionally, during the preparation, they uncovered a new detail. A year before Michelle's murder, Jason had purchased a pair of shoes with tread patterns matching the bloody footprints found in her bedroom. But the shoes were never found. These additional elements strengthened the case against Jason, and this time the jury convicted him. Jason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lawyer continued to appeal, but all of them were dismissed. The case received widespread media coverage, and its outcome sparked fierce controversy. On one hand, over the years, there was no physical evidence directly linking Jason to the murder. On the other hand, a series of circumstantial evidence suggested he nearly pulled off a perfect cover-up. If he hadn't stopped at the gas station that morning and argued with the employee, the worker might not have remembered him. In that case, the case could have remained an unsolved mystery. As for the woman who was seen sitting in his car by a neighbor that night, her identity remains unknown. There are no other clues indicating anyone else was involved in the crime. The hair and DNA of another person found in the house weren't enough to prove this. It could have just been from a previous visitor. However, the prosecution hasn't completely ruled out the possibility that someone helped Jason, but this remains a mystery.